young woman's bare hand closed over the cold iron latch of the servant's door, and she held it there a moment before she dared to lift it, as though the metal itself might cry out and wake the whole of Thorndale Hall. The night pressed wet against her back. Somewhere beyond the kitchen gardens, an owl called once and went silent, and Tamsin Rain counted 5 heartbeats against her ribs before the latch gave with a sigh no louder than her own breath. She had told herself she would not tremble. Her hand trembled all the same as the great dark kitchen swallowed her whole. Inside it smelled of banked coals and yesterday's roasting, of flour and tallow, and the faint green sweetness of herbs hung to dry from the beams overhead. Her eyes, ruined by an hour of walking through moonless fields, found only shapes at first. The vast scrubbed table like an altar, the dull copper faces of pans hung in rows, the black cavern of the hearth, where a single ember still pulsed like a small red heart refusing to die. She knew where the bread would be. She had learned that 3 nights ago, when hunger had first driven her past shame and taught her the geography of another man's larder. On the deep shelf beside the pantry door, wrapped in linen, the day's loaves waited to grow stale. She crossed the flagstones without a sound, for she had learned that too, that a body could be made quiet if the mind refused to let it be otherwise. And her fingers found the linen and folded it back, and the smell of the bread rose up so warm and living that her throat ached with it. 2 loaves. She would take 1, never both. Never enough to be truly missed. Only enough to keep 3 small bodies alive one more day. Her hand was already closing round the loaf when a voice spoke out of the dark behind her, low and terribly calm. "Whatever it is you have come for," the voice said, "I would put it down if I were you." Tamsin did not scream. Later she would wonder at that, at the strange animal stillness that came over her instead. The loaf clutched to her breast, her whole self gone rigid as a hair that believes if it does not move it cannot be seen. A flint struck. A candle flared. And in the sudden trembling light she saw him. A tall man in his shirt sleeves, dark hair loose about a hard, unsmiling face. A face she had seen only once before at a distance across the market square and had been told to fear. The Duke of Thorndale. His eyes found her, and whatever careless contempt he had prepared for a common thief died on his face when he saw that the thief was a girl, and that the girl was looking back at him, not with cunning, but with the flat, exhausted courage of someone who has nothing left to lose. "You are stealing from me," he said. It was not quite a question. "Yes." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. She would not lie to him. Lying was a thing you did when you still had a reputation worth saving. "I am." He came a step nearer, and the candlelight slid across the planes of his face, and she saw that he was younger than his reputation and wearier. He looked at the loaf held against her thin grey gown, at her cracked and reddened hands, at the mud drying on the hem of her skirts, and something moved behind his eyes that she could not name. She braced herself for the shout that would bring the servants, for the grip on her arm, for the word thief flung like a stone. "You will hang for less," he said instead, very quietly, "if the magistrate is in a poor humour. Do you know that?" "I know it." Her chin came up. "And I will steal it again tomorrow night, my lord, if you let me live to see tomorrow. So you had best decide now what sort of man you mean to be." For a long moment, the Duke of Thorndale said nothing at all. The ember in the hearth ticked and settled. And then, when she was certain he would ring for the footman, he tilted his head a fraction, the way a man does when a thing has failed to make the sense he expected of it. and he asked her the question that would undo them both. "You have not eaten," he said. "You are half-starved. I can see it in your wrists. And yet you take the bread and you hold it away from your own mouth as though it were made of glass. Why steal bread," he said slowly, "and eat none of it?" The question found the one door in her she had kept bolted, and behind it were 3 sleeping faces in a cold room a half-mile distant, and she could not answer him without opening it. So she pressed her lips together and said nothing, and the silence stretched between them, and the Duke watched her hands tighten round the loaf, and understanding came into his face by degrees, the way dawn comes, grey first, and then terrible. "It is not for you," he said. She fled. She did not decide to. Her body decided for her, bolting for the door with the loaf still crushed to her chest, out into the wet dark and across the kitchen garden, with her heart slamming and her breath tearing at her throat. Behind her, she heard the scrape of a door and a single word, "Stop," flung after her, not angry, something else. But she did not stop. She ran through the walled garden and out the low gate and across the black meadow toward the tumble-down ruin of the old dower house, where the ivy had eaten the windows and the roof had fallen in over the east wing, where no one came, where 3 children lay hidden under every blanket she owned. She ran until her lungs were fire, and only at the broken doorway did she turn and see him. He had not raised the alarm. He had followed her alone, on foot, without a lantern, a dark figure crossing the silvered grass with a stride that ate the distance between them, and she had no breath left to run further and nowhere left to run to. She stood in the ruined doorway with the loaf in her arms and the children breathing behind her in the dark, and she spread her arms across the threshold as though her narrow body could bar a duke from anything, and she said the only thing left to say, "Please." The word broke in the middle. "Please, my lord, take me to the magistrate, hang me, do what you will, but leave them be. They have done nothing. They are only children." The Duke of Thorndale stopped 3 feet from her, and then he looked past her shoulder into the ruin, where the fallen moonlight through the broken roof lay across a heap of blankets, and where a small tousled head had lifted, and a child's voice, thick with sleep and fear, whispered into the dark, "Tam, Tam, is it you?" And behind that head 2 more, a girl of perhaps 10, with her thin arms already thrown protectively across a smaller shape, a baby stirring against her side. The Duke went utterly still. She watched it happen. She watched the colour leave his face in the moonlight, and his jaw set as though against a blow, and his hand, half raised, fall slowly back to his side. He looked at the 3 orphan children hidden in the ruins of his own estate, at the frost already silvering the stones around them, and whatever he had meant to say, whatever hard and reasonable thing a duke ought to say to a woman caught stealing his bread, he did not say it. His throat worked. When at last he spoke, his voice had gone strange and low, scraped down to almost nothing. "How long," he said, "have they been sleeping in the cold?" The girl with the thin protective arms was called Bess, and she was 10 years old and had the wary eyes of someone twice that age. The boy was Toby, 7, all knees and elbows and a cowlick that would not lie flat, and the baby the girl held was little May, who was not yet 2 and did not remember her mother's face. Their mother had been Tamsin's own sister, dead of the fever that had swept the village of Witchcombe the winter before last, and their father drowned at sea before that, and when the parish overseer had come to take them to the workhouse 40 miles distant, where Tamsin knew, everyone knew, that small children went in and did not always come out. She had taken them instead. She had sold her father's books and her mother's ring and the little cottage's few sticks of furniture. And when that money was gone, she had done the only thing left to a woman with 3 children and no name and no man to stand for her. She had begun to steal bread. She told the Duke none of this in the ruined dower house. She told it to him the following morning, in a room she had never dreamed of standing in, a breakfast parlour all gold and pale blue, with a fire roaring in a marble hearth, because the Duke of Thorndale had not taken her to the magistrate. He had instead gathered the sleeping baby into his own arms, with a clumsy tenderness that had made her chest ache, and carried her the half-mile back to the hall through the freezing dark, and roused his household from their beds, and by the time the sun rose, the 3 children were washed and fed and asleep in real beds with warming pans at their feet, and Tamsin Rain was sitting across a breakfast table from a duke, telling him the shape of her ruin while he listened without once looking away. "You might have come to me," he said, when she had finished. He was turning a coffee cup in his long fingers, not drinking it. "You might have come to the door and asked. Men like you do not open doors to women like me, my lord." She said it without bitterness. It was only true. I have learned that a closed hand is safer to trust than an open one. The closed hand, at least, one can predict. Something flickered across his face. She thought, absurdly, that she had wounded him, and he set the cup down very carefully in its saucer, and for a long moment he looked into the fire rather than at her. "No, child," he said at last, and his voice had that scraped quality again. "Sleeps hungry under my roof. Not while I am master of it." He said it as though it were a law older than himself, as though it were the one immovable thing in a shifting world. "You will stay, all of you, until other arrangements can be made that are decent. Do you understand me?" She did not understand him. That was the truth of it. She could not understand why a man feared across 3 counties, a man the whole village crossed itself against, a man who by every right and every law might have seen her hang, had instead installed a thief and 3 parish orphans beneath his own roof, against every rule of propriety that governed his world. But she understood enough to know that she would not be able to refuse him, and that some part of her, some frightened and long cold part, did not wish to. The household did not share their master's charity, and Tamsin felt the weight of their disapproval before she had been at Thorndale a single day. The housekeeper, Mrs. Prewitt, a rigid woman with a face like a closed drawer, looked at Tamsin's mended gown and her chapped hands, and could not keep the judgment from her mouth. "Whatever His Grace intends by it," she said, folding sheets that Tamsin had offered to help her fold. "You will forgive me if I keep the silver counted." The footman fell silent when Tamsin passed, and in the village she knew the story would already be running house to house like fire through summer grass, that the Duke of Thorndale had taken a thieving nobody and her brood of paupers into the hall. And what could a man want with such a woman but the one thing a man ever wanted? And there was an end to her good name. If she had had one left to lose, she would have borne it all for the sight of the children safe. She had not expected to be undone by small mercies. It was the Duke who undid her. Not with grand things. He made no speeches, offered no protestations, and indeed, for the first several days he scarcely spoke to her at all, retreating into the cold reserve the world knew him for. It was the small things she was not meant to see. A tray of warm milk sent up to the nursery each night without her asking. A worn old rocking horse, its paint long faded, carried up from some locked attic by 2 straining footmen and set at the foot of Toby's bed. And once, passing the half-open door of the library, she saw the Duke of Thorndale on the floor before the fire, with little May pulling fistfuls of his careful hair, and his face, his hard, feared, guarded face, gone soft and open and grieving in a way that stopped Tamsin's feet on the threshold and would not let her breathe. He looked up. He saw her seeing him, and she watched the old iron door close again behind his eyes, watched him set the baby gently aside and rise and become the Duke once more. And she thought, before she could stop herself, that a man does not learn to shut a door so quickly unless he has practiced it 1,000 times upon some grief too large to carry in the open. "She likes you," Tamsin said, because she could not bear the silence. "May, she does not take to strangers. She would not go to the vicar's wife who is kindness itself." "Children," the Duke said, brushing his sleeve as though to brush the moment away, "are poor judges of character. It is their chief charm." But at the door he paused, his back to her, and added so low she almost missed it, "I had a sister once. She was fond of that horse." And then he was gone down the corridor, and Tamsin stood alone in the firelight with her heart beating oddly, understanding that she had been given something, and that she did not yet know its price. The days folded into a shape none of them had names for. Tamsin taught Bess her letters at the long library table, while snow gathered soft against the windows. Toby discovered the stables and returned each evening reeking of horse and joy. And the Duke, who had 100 more important things to be, who had estates and tenants and a seat in the Lords, began to be found more and more often wherever the children were. He taught Toby to whittle. He listened with a grave attention that undid the boy entirely, to Bess reading haltingly aloud. And one grey afternoon, coming upon Tamsin in the music room, where she had been persuaded to pick out an old tune on the pianoforte she had no right to touch, he did not withdraw. He stood in the doorway and listened to the end. And when she stopped, mortified, snatching her cracked hands from the keys, he crossed the room and said, "No, go on. My sister used to play that. I have not heard it in 15 years. I am sorry." She rose. "I ought not to have—" "Sit," he said. "Please." And the please undid her again, because dukes did not say please, not to women like her. And he came and stood beside the instrument, close enough that she could see the pulse beating at the base of his throat above his cravat. And he said, looking not at her, but at some middle distance where the past lived, "Cecily." Her name was Cecily. Sissy. She was 8 years younger than I, and when she took the fever, the physician said she must be kept warm and quiet. And I— He stopped. His jaw worked. I was a boy, 12 years old. I sat with her every night, and I held her hand, and I promised her she would be well, and she believed me, because I was her brother, and I had never lied to her. And she died in the cold, small hours of a February morning, with her hand in mine, and I could not keep one single promise I had made her. Tamsin's own hand had lifted from the keys without her leave. It hovered a moment in the space between them, this bare, ruined, work-reddened hand of a thief, and then it settled, very lightly, upon the fine cloth of his sleeve, a thing that no rule in the world permitted, a touch across a gulf that no touch was meant to cross. She felt him go still beneath it. She felt the warmth of him through the wool. "That is why," she said softly, "in the kitchen, when you understood the bread was not for me, that is why you froze." He looked down at her hand upon his arm, as though it were a thing he could not account for. He did not shake it off. For one suspended moment, the whole house seemed to hold its breath around them, and his hand rose. She saw it rise, as if to close over hers, and then a footman coughed in the doorway with a letter upon a salver, and the Duke of Thorndale stepped back, and the moment shut like a fan. The letter was from his aunt. The Dowager Duchess of Thorndale descended upon the hall 3 days later in a great black travelling coach, a formidable woman armoured in bombazine and consequence, and she had not been in the house an hour before she understood exactly what she had come to prevent. Tamsin, summoned to the drawing room like a servant to be inspected, stood under that raking gaze and felt every mended seam of her gown catalogued and condemned. "You will not marry her," the dowager said to her nephew, in Tamsin's hearing, as though Tamsin were a piece of furniture that could not object. "I do not care what soft fancy this Christmas pantomime of orphans has stirred in you. Lady Arabella Frost arrives on Thursday. Her father commands 11,000 a year and a block of votes you require. You will offer for her at the ball, before the county, and this creature and her waifs will be given a cottage and a pension and forgotten, as is proper." She turned her cold eyes upon Tamsin. "You seem a sensible girl, beneath the mud. You know what you are. You know what he is. Do not make him choose, for you know already what he must choose." "I have asked nothing of him," Tamsin said, and was proud that her voice did not shake. "Nothing but bread, and that I stole." "See that you continue to ask nothing," said the dowager. "It is the only dignity left to you." That night, Tamsin did not sleep. She sat at the nursery window with the baby warm and heavy against her shoulder and watched the moon ride the bare black trees, and she made herself look, clearly and without flinching, at the truth the old woman had handed her. She had let herself forget what she was, in the warmth of that house, in the music room with her bare hand upon his sleeve. She had let herself begin to hope a thing that had no right to exist, and hope, she knew, was the cruelest thief of all, for it stole the strength a person needed to bear their own life. He must marry Lady Arabella Frost. Of course he must, and every day that Tamsin stayed beneath his roof, she blackened his name and endangered the children's fragile safety, and fed a fire that could end only in her own greater ruin. She pressed her lips to the baby's downy head. She knew what she had to do. She would have done it too, would have taken the children and slipped away at dawn as she had come, into the anonymous country, before the ball, before Lady Arabella, before she could cost him anything more. But she had reckoned without Mr. Sowerby. Ambrose Sowerby was the parish overseer of the poor, a soft-spoken man with cold, clever eyes, who was paid a shilling a head for every pauper he delivered to the workhouse, and he had not forgotten that 3 profitable orphans had vanished from his ledgers the winter before. He came to Thorndale Hall on the very morning of the ball, with 2 hard-faced men and a paper stamped with the parish seal, and he did not trouble to hide his satisfaction. "Stolen bread," he said, spreading the document upon the hall table with one manicured finger, "is a hanging matter, or transportation at the mildest, and these children are wards of the parish, unlawfully removed. I have come to correct both errors, your grace, and to relieve your household of an embarrassment. The girl to the assizes, the children to the workhouse, where they belong." He smiled. "Unless, of course, your grace wishes it known throughout the county, on the very day you announce your betrothal, that you have been sheltering a thief and her bastards for a month beneath your roof. That would be awkward, I think." Tamsin, frozen on the stair above, saw the Duke's face and understood at last the whole cruel machinery that closed around them. If he defended her, Sowerby would ruin him with the scandal on the day his marriage and his political future depended upon a spotless name. If he did not, she would hang, and the children would be swallowed by the workhouse. Sowerby had built a cage with no unbarred side, and the Duke of Thorndale stood in the great cold hall of his ancestors with his jaw set like stone, and said in a voice gone flat and dead, "You will give me until this evening, Mr. Sowerby. You will take your paper and your men, and you will wait until the ball is ended, out of respect for my guests. And then..." His eyes went up, once, to where Tamsin stood on the stair, and away again. "And then you shall have your answer." He did not look at her again. He turned and walked away down the long corridor, and every door of him was shut, and Tamsin stood on the stair with her heart in ruins, and knew that the choosing the dowager had spoken of had come, and that she already knew what he must choose, and that she loved him. There at last the forbidden word arrived too late to be any use to her. She loved him, and it changed nothing at all. so she chose for him. She would not let him be ruined for her. She would not stand in his hall on the night of his betrothal and watch him weigh her worthless neck against everything he owed his name and his tenants and the memory of his father. While the household churned with the coming ball, while the great rooms filled with candlelight and hothouse flowers and the drive filled with carriages, Tamsin Rain bundled 3 sleeping children into every warm thing she could gather and took a heel of bread from the kitchen. The last theft, she promised herself, the last one ever. And she carried May on her hip and led Bess and Toby by the hand out the servants' door into the wild, wet dark, into the rain that had begun to fall in sheets across the meadow, meaning to be gone before he ever had to choose her or destroy her. She got as far as the gates, the great iron gates of Thorndale streaming with rain, locked against the night. And there, soaked to the skin, one hand upon the cold, wet iron in a terrible echo of the latch she had lifted a lifetime ago, Tamsin heard her own name called across the storm in a voice she would have known in her grave. Tamsin! He was running. The Duke of Thorndale, in his fine black evening clothes, with the rain flattening his dark hair to his skull, running down the drive from the blazing lighted hall behind him, running as though something were being torn out of him with every stride. He caught her at the gates and gripped her by the shoulders, and his chest was heaving, and his eyes in the wild dark were not cold at all. They were terrified. "You were leaving," he said. "You were going to take them and go and let me marry that woman and never know where you had gone. You have to marry her." The rain ran into her mouth, her eyes. She could not tell it from the rest. "Sowerby will destroy you. Your name, your seat, everything your father built. For what? For a thief. For a woman who came in the night to steal your bread. Let me go. I am begging you to let me go, and it will all be as it was, and no one will ever know, and you will be safe." Safe. He said the word as though it disgusted him. "I have been safe my entire life. I have been safe and cold and shut behind my own doors since I was 12 years old, and I held my sister's hand and could not save her. And then you came in the night and stole my bread and would not eat it, and I asked you why." His hands tightened on her shoulders, and the rain poured down between them. "I asked you why, and you would not answer, and I have not had 1 hour's true peace since, because the answer was that you were breaking the law and risking your neck to feed 3 children who were nothing to you, and you did it without once asking to be thanked or seen or saved. And I stood in my kitchen and I looked at you and I thought," his voice cracked clean in 2, "I thought, there is a person more alive than I have let myself be in 20 years. And I froze, Tamsin, because I could not remember the last time I had felt anything at all. 'My lord, Julian,' he said. 'My name is Julian. My sister was the last person alive to use it. I would have you use it. I would have you use it for the rest of my life.' And there, in the streaming dark, with the children huddled wide-eyed under a shawl and the storm roaring in the elms, the Duke of Thorndale took her ruined bare hand in both of his, this hand that had stolen from him, and he pressed it to his mouth. 'Come back inside, not to hide, not in shame. Come back inside and stand beside me before every one of them, and let them see exactly whom I have chosen, and let Sowerby do his worst. I would rather lose my name with you than keep it without you. Come inside, Tamsin. No child sleeps hungry under my roof, and no woman I love leaves it in the rain." She could not speak. She had no words left in the whole world. So she did the only thing she had strength for. She closed her cold bare fingers around his, and she held on, and she let him lead her back through the rain toward the light. The ballroom of Thorndale Hall had never in its long history held so scandalous a sight. 200 of the finest families in 3 counties turned as one when the doors opened, and every fan and every glass and every whispered word fell into a silence so complete that Tamsin could hear the rain against the tall windows. She stood dripping upon the polished floor in her sodden grey gown, with her hair come loose about her face. A thief, a nobody, and beside her stood the Duke of Thorndale in his soaked evening clothes, with 3 parish orphans clustered against his legs, and he did not let go of her hand. Across the room, the Dowager Duchess rose half out of her chair, her face gone white. Lady Arabella Frost, jewelled and lovely, stared, and by the great fireplace, Mr. Ambrose Sowerby went very still, his clever cold eyes reading the room, calculating. "Your Grace." Sowerby's soft voice slid into the silence. "I must protest. This is neither the time nor... It is exactly the time." The Duke's voice was not loud, but it carried to the farthest corner of that great room, and it had in it something Tamsin had never heard from him before. Not the cold command the county feared, but a warmth turned to iron. "You have all come tonight to hear me announce my future. Here it is. This woman is Miss Tamsin Rain. A month ago she came into my kitchen in the dark of night and stole a loaf of bread, and when I caught her, I asked her why she would steal and not eat. She would not tell me. I followed her, and I found the reason." He looked down at the children pressed against him, at Bess and Toby and small May with her thumb in her mouth. 3 orphans of this parish, whom she had saved from the workhouse with her own 2 hands and everything she owned, and hidden and fed and kept alive through a winter, alone, asking nothing of anyone. That, my friends, is the crime for which this gentleman... His eyes turned upon Sowerby, and they were not warm at all, would see her transported, and these children broken upon a parish wheel for the shilling a head it pays him. A rustle went through the room like wind through a field of barley. "I know what I am expected to do," the Duke went on, and now he turned to his aunt, and his voice gentled, though it did not yield. "I know the marriage I was to make tonight, and the reasons for it, and they are good reasons, and I honour them. But I have spent my whole life being what was expected of me, and it made me a man who could stand in his own warm house and feel nothing while children slept in the cold half a mile from his door. She woke me. A thief woke me, when no duchess ever could." He lifted her bare hand, still clasped in his, so that all the room could see the cracked and reddened fingers of it laced through his own. "So I will not offer for Lady Arabella Frost, to whom I have given no promise, and owe only my sincere respect and my apology. I will marry Miss Rain. I will adopt these children as my own wards, under my name and my protection, this very night, and any man who calls that a scandal may take it up with me directly. Beginning," he said, turning at last, full upon the overseer, "with you, Mr. Sowerby. My solicitors will examine your ledgers in the morning, every shilling, every child. I think you will find you have a great deal more to fear from the light than she ever did." Sowerby's face had gone the colour of tallow. He opened his mouth and shut it, and found nothing in all his cold cleverness to say, and in the terrible silence that followed, he gathered the shreds of his consequence and walked out of the ballroom, and out of the hall, and out of their lives, and the door boomed shut behind him. And then, Tamsin would remember it to the end of her days. A single pair of hands began to clap somewhere at the back of the room, and then another, and another, until the great gilded ballroom of Thorndale rang with it, and Lady Arabella Frost herself was smiling and clapping with the rest. and only the Dowager Duchess sat rigid and silent in her chair, looking at her nephew's face, at the way he looked at the dripping thief beside him, as though she had hung the moon. The old woman found Tamsin an hour later, apart from the crush, by the tall windows. Tamsin braced for the blow, but the dowager only looked at her a long moment with those raking eyes, and then down at the children asleep now in a heap upon a chaise, and something in her iron face gave way by the smallest degree. "He has not looked like that," she said at last, "since he was a boy, since before his sister died, and he shut himself up in a suit of armour and would let no living soul near him." She drew a slow breath. "I came here to prevent a foolish match. I find I have prevented nothing, and I am too old and too tired to be sorry for it." She inclined her head, a fraction, no more, but from the Dowager Duchess of Thorndale, it was a coronation. "Welcome to the family, Miss Rain. God help us all. See that you continue to steal his bread. It appears to agree with him." They were married on a morning of hard, bright frost in the little grey church at Witchcombe, where Tamsin's own father had once taught the village children their letters, and the whole parish came, the ones who had crossed themselves against the Duke, and the ones who had whispered against Tamsin, and every one of them wept, because there is nothing the world loves so well as the moment when it is proved wrong about the possibility of tenderness. Bess carried the flowers. Toby, scrubbed to an unnatural shine, forgot to be solemn and grinned all through the vows. And little May, who was 2 now and had begun to call Tamsin Mama, and the Duke a word that was almost Papa, slept through the whole of it in the crook of the Dowager's bombazine arm. And then the years, as years will, gathered themselves and ran. There was a christening the following winter, and another 2 years after that, and the great, cold nursery at Thorndale that had stood shut and silent for a generation, filled with noise and firelight and the thunder of small feet upon the boards. Bess grew tall and clever and was sent, at her own fierce insistence, to be educated as well as any lady in the land, and grew into a young woman who would one day run a school of her own for children the parish had forgotten. Toby got his own horse, and then a commission he did not need, and came home whole from every campaign, to a mother who would not let go of him for an hour. And Thorndale Hall, which the county had once crossed itself against, became known through 3 counties as the warmest house in England, where no traveller was turned from the door, and where it was whispered, and it was true. The Duke himself could sometimes be found on the floor of his library with a child pulling fistfuls of his careful hair, his hard face gone soft and open, all his doors thrown wide at last. He never called her anything but Tamsin. She never called him anything but Julian. And every year, on the anniversary of the night she had first lifted his kitchen latch, the Duke of Thorndale would rise in the small cold hours and go down alone to the kitchen and cut 2 thick slices from a fresh warm loaf, and carry them up to the room where his wife lay sleeping, and wake her with the smell of bread, and they would eat it together in the dark by the window while the household slept, saying nothing, needing nothing. His gloved hand from some winter ball still closed warm over her bare one, and it was the closest thing to a prayer that either of them knew. Once, on such a night, many years on, with grey come into his dark hair and their eldest grandchild asleep down the corridor, he turned to her in the firelight and asked her the old question, the one that had begun it all, his voice full of a wonder that had never worn away. "Why steal bread," he said softly, "and eat none of it?" And Tamsin Rain, who had come to that great house a thief in the dark and stayed to become the beating heart of it, took his gloved hand in both her bare ones and pressed it to her mouth, and gave him the only answer that had ever mattered, because love, she said, is only ever the thing you are willing to go hungry for. I did not know that night that I was stealing my whole life. I only knew a door I dared not knock upon, and you opened it anyway. And here, by our own fire, I find myself wondering about you. If you had been the one standing in that dark kitchen, cold and afraid, and holding a loaf of bread meant for someone smaller than yourself, do you think you would have found the courage to look a duke in the eye and refuse to beg? And if a knock came at your door tonight, from someone the whole world had already decided was beneath you, would you open it, not knowing that your whole life stood waiting on the other side? Tell me truly in the comments below. I read every one of them, and I treasure them. And if this story warmed the cold corners of your evening even a little, stay with me, subscribe and settle in, and let us light the candles again tomorrow night, for there are so many more forbidden hearts left to unlock, and I would so love to unlock them with you.